Hello and welcome, everyone. Here's another transmigration story for you titled, What If a Fired Office Worker Transmigrates as a Side Character in a BL Romance Story? Now, most of you probably know by now, I love transmigration stories. In fact, I'm obsessed about them. And of course, reborn or rebirth stories are just as great. When it comes to transmigration stories, there's just something about a character getting the opportunity to level up their life in a new world that just pulls me in. And it's even better if in their own world, they aren't really happy or are exhausted. That just makes the story all the more enjoyable. So I wrote the story from the perspective of an office worker who has just been fired and finds his way in a new world thanks to Truckin. Oh, and in case you didn't know, I love Truckin. Anyway, I wrote the story as a light read purely for your entertainment. So I hope you enjoy the story as much as I enjoyed writing it. And here goes the narration.
Chapter 1. We need money. I took a long swig of my beer. My colleagues murmured in agreement, nursing their own beers. I recalled the video Huang had sent me in the morning. I'd been brushing my teeth, phone propped against the bathroom mirror when the notification came in. My boyfriend of 8 months, the one who claimed he was too tired to come over on weekends, kissing a woman in what looked like a very nice restaurant. I had stood there with toothpaste foaming at my mouth, staring at my phone, and then very calmly spat into the sink. Then I went to work. I know. In hindsight, that was perhaps not the correct response, but I had bills, and I told myself I'd deal with the boyfriend situation later, except work had its own plans for me. By 11 a.m., I was sitting in the HR office being handed a termination letter and a pamphlet about employee assistance programs, the corporate equivalent of being patted on the head while being shoved out a window. I was among the lucky 400 employees to be terminated. And that was how I ended up here, in a barbecue restaurant 2 blocks from the office in the afternoon, drinking beer with 5 of my now equally unemployed colleagues, the air thick with smoke, the table cluttered with empty bottles and plates of char-grilled pork belly that honestly smelled incredible, despite the circumstances. I still ate 3 pieces. I'm not a man who lets grief interfere with good pork belly. I have exactly, my colleague Chen squinted at his phone calculator, 19 days of savings left. After that, I am legally a burden on society. 31 for me, someone else said, if I stop buying beer. I ate another piece of pork. 1 month. That was roughly what I had too. Good thing I didn't have to make uncomfortable phone calls to inform family members I'd been successfully avoiding for the better part of 3 years. I'm going to find a sugar mummy, declared Chen. Maybe a rich widow who doesn't ask too many questions. The table erupted. Laughter, beer bottles clinking, someone choking on their drink. I laughed too. You know what? I pointed my bottle at him. Count me in. I meant it about 70%. Sugar mummy, sugar daddy, sugar anyone with a villa. More laughter. Someone suggested we make a group pact. We raised our bottles. By the time we decided to wrap up and head home, I was only a bit tipsy. Okay, fine. I was comfortably mid-drunk. Mid-drunk is the sweet spot where the world has gone soft around the edges and you feel like you're floating. I said goodbye to the others outside the restaurant and headed for the train station. The street was busy. I could hear the traffic, the horns, the distant chatter of a food vendor. I was thinking about my rent, which was due in 3 weeks, when I realized I had stepped off the curb. I looked up. There was a truck. One moment I was upright, the next I was not. And in the fraction of a second between the two, I had exactly one thought. I really should have looked left and right. And then the world went dark. Chapter 2. The first thing I noticed was that I was standing, which was strange because the last thing I remembered was being hit by a truck bumper. Yet here I was, upright and in a room. It was large, a high ceiling, dark wood furniture that looked like it cost an eye or something. Afternoon light cut through tall windows. Baoching. Someone called out. The name hit me like a physical thing. It came from somewhere to my right, and it rattled around in my chest. Here's the strange thing. I was Lao. I knew I was Lao. I remembered the beer, the barbecue restaurant, Chen's sugar mummy declaration, the truck. I remembered all of it with complete clarity. But the moment that name landed in the air, something in me responded. That name felt like mine. Baoching. I didn't have time to further examine that particular discovery because the voice followed up immediately. Do you realize you're being completely unreasonable? I turned. The man standing across the room was... Okay, I need a moment here. I was looking at a top-grade supermodel. He was significantly tall, sharp jaw, strong brow, dark eyes currently arranged in an expression of extreme displeasure, wearing a dark-fitted denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His arms were crossed. Those veins on his forearms looked lickable. And just like that, something clicked. I was now inhabiting the body of a secondary character in a BL novel. I did not hesitate. I dropped to my knees to apologize to the male lead. The apology came out as more of a whimper, not because I was emotionally overwhelmed, but because my knees had just made contact with what I now realized were the shards of a broken clay vase scattered across the rug. And of course, I was wearing shorts. The vase shards were not small. They hurt so much, my eyes immediately watered. The anger on the man's face shifted. "You absolute idiot," he said, but the thunder had gone out of his voice. He crossed the room in a few strides, crouched down, and caught my arm. "Don't move, just stay still." He turned his head toward the door. "Auntie Tong, first aid box, now please." Then he scooped me up, one arm under my knees and the other at my back, and deposited me on the large sofa with such gentleness that it contradicted the irritation still sitting around his eyes. And also, this was my first time experiencing the Princess Carrie style. I wasn't against it. He sat on the low table in front of me, first aid box appearing within 30 seconds, courtesy of a wide-eyed woman, probably the housekeeper who retreated after being told to clear up the shards later. He opened the box and got to work on my knees. I hissed when the antiseptic stung. He glanced up and then down at my knees and murmured, "This is what happens when you break things." I used this time to think. Like those Transmigration novels, I had come to this world and taken over a side character. I now had a second consciousness that seemed to have been uploaded the moment I opened my eyes. I didn't need to piece it together, I simply knew. The way you know your own name, the way you know the layout of your apartment in the dark. I was Baoching, I was also Lao. Both were true. Simultaneously, more importantly, I knew exactly where I was. Tears of My Love. A BL novel I had read on my phone roughly 3 months ago, finished in 2 late nights. Lots of angst, lots of slow burn romance, very satisfying ending for the main couple. The main couple being Jing and Yilong. The very handsome man currently wrapping my knees in gauze with particular care was Jing, the male lead. And I was Baoching, the side character, the obstacle, the one who loved Jing desperately, expended enormous energy trying to win him, used increasingly unhinged tactics, drove Jing away by being erratic, and ultimately exited the story via drunk driving and a tragic accident. Jing and Yilong had been childhood friends. Jing was in love with Yilong, but the latter had not felt the same way, and had in fact been seeing someone else. Then Baoching came along. He had asked Jing out. Jing, to his credit, had been honest, told him clearly that there was already someone in his heart, that it wouldn't be fair to start something. A reasonable man would have accepted this and moved on. Not Baoching, though. He had insisted, persisted, worn Jing down. And so they had dated nearly a year of it. Then Yilong's relationship had fallen apart, and he had come running to Jing, tearful and freshly heartbroken. And that was where I had arrived. I looked down at the top of Jing's head. Then I looked around at the villa, the rug, the dark wood, the curtains, the effortless abundance of a life I had never come anywhere close to in my previous one. Jing, as the novel had established, was head of an entire department at his family's electronic company. The kind of position that came with a car that cost more than most people's apartments and a villa that cost a human soul. In my own world, I had about 1 month's worth of savings. I'd been laid off, my boyfriend had been kissing someone else in a restaurant, and now I was here. Baoching, in the novel, had been head over heels for this man and had gone about showing it in the worst possible ways. Tantrums, schemes, jealousy so extreme it had curdled into something destructive. He'd tried to drive away Yilong, including hiring people to rough him up, which had been the final straw. In the side chapters, there had been a small part included in the male lead's perspective. Jing had, quietly and without Baoching's knowledge, actually begun to consider returning his feelings. It was the jealousy and the escalating behavior that had killed it. Baoching, such a fool. I, however, had read over 1,000 romance novels, more than half of which were BL, and I was not a fool. Jing finally stood up. He still looked faintly annoyed. Make sure to keep them dry, and don't move around too much for now. I nodded, let my lower lip tremble, just slightly. Baoching's face, per the novel, and the consciousness that came with the body, told me it was lovely. Light brown eyes, cute nose, plush lips. Jing blinked. I patted the sofa cushion beside me. Not long after, he sat down. The moment he sat, I leaned sideways and rested my head on his shoulder. He went very still. I get jealous easily, I said into the fabric of his shirt in the softest voice I could manage. You know that. I could feel him looking down at the top of my head. Yilong is a friend. Jing's voice had taken on a coaxing quality. Only a friend. I need you to stop starting arguments every time he visits. I responded in an even smaller voice, You did tell me you loved him. Jing shifted slightly and his hand came up to rest at the back of my head. That was a long time ago. What I feel now is not what I felt then. I nodded, still taking quiet inventory of the opulent villa we lived in together. This was a very significant upgrade from a one-bedroom apartment, a termination letter, and a cheating boyfriend. Baoching had had all of this and thrown it away, chasing Jing's love with a sledgehammer. Well, I was here now. I nuzzled slightly against Jing's shoulder. Good thing my ability to keep a cool head in a crisis was not limited to just one lifetime. Chapter 3. Over the next few days, I made a few checks. I had no money. Well, I had access to whatever Baoching had, which, from the looks of the villa and the black card sitting in the wallet I'd discovered in the bedroom, was considerably more than nothing. But that was Jing's money, extended to Baoching, as a matter of course in their relationship, which meant it was dependent on the relationship continuing, which meant I had to give it my all not to be thrown out. Baoching's own family situation, courtesy of the instant consciousness given to me, was bleak. A single mother who thought the sun rose and set over his older brother, a high-earning, high-achieving golden child who could do no wrong. Baoching had grown up somewhere in that brother's shadow, which probably explained a great deal about the desperate, clinging love he'd developed for Jing. He'd wanted someone to choose him first. The point was, I had no independent safety net, no savings, no job. What I had was a beautiful face, a body the original Baoching had maintained very well, a villa that had underfloor heating, a housekeeper, Auntie Tong who made the most extraordinary dishes I had tasted in either of my lives, and a male lead with a soft spot he hadn't fully acknowledged yet. I was going to have to be clever about this. Per my calculation, it was 2 weeks since Yilong had first come running back to Jing, freshly single and full of tears. I was in the bathroom, admiring the face that was now mine. Baoching had made critical errors in the novel. He had made his jealousy loud, tantrums, accusations, broken vases, all of which communicated to Jing that he was unstable rather than in love. Next, he had treated Yilong like an enemy to be defeated rather than a minor inconvenience to be managed. Finally, he had never once made Jing feel safe. He had only ever made Jing feel responsible for someone else's emotional volatility. What I knew from my reading expertise was that male leads did not fall for chaos. They fell for the person who made them want to come home, the person who was warm when they were tired, the person who made them feel they were chosen. Generally speaking, almost everyone wanted that, didn't they? Baoching had been screaming, "Choose me," without ever giving Jing a reason to. I straightened up and looked at myself one more time. May the power of all BL stories reside within me. My transformation was paced in small increments. I made sure it wasn't a single moment. It was an accumulation of small, well-placed things, and it started the next morning. Jing came down to breakfast to find the table already set. I had asked Auntie Tong to prepare congee, egg custard, the silky kind that had a spoonful of soy sauce on the surface, and me sitting at the table reading on my phone, which was a better domestic image than the original Baoching's habit of sulking in bed until noon. Jing stopped in the doorway. I looked up, smiled. "Good morning. Auntie Tong made congee." He sat down. We ate. I asked about his work, listened to the answer, asked a follow-up question, not in the probing, suspicious way Baoching had always interrogated him, looking for evidence of Yilong's involvement in every meeting. I applied genuine interest or a convincing performance of it. By the time Jing left for work, he had paused at the door and looked back at me twice. That was definitely a win. I also took advantage of the cuts on my knees. The cuts weren't deep, but I made a fuss about them. Thankfully, Jing took my recovery very strictly. Every other evening, without fail, he'd sit me down, unwrap the bandages, clean the cuts, and rewrap them. I helped by being as pitiful as possible and asked for a kiss on each knee after he was done wrapping them up. He always rolled his eyes, but complied. The first time I'd asked for the kisses, I'd only been half serious, but when he planted the kisses, I had to fight the urge to look away. Ears hot, this kissing routine continued until the cuts healed completely. The first real test came 5 days later when Yilong visited. I heard his voice in the entrance hall from the living room and felt the original Baoching's instincts rise in me like a reflex, a spike of fury, a need to stomp to the door and start a fight. I sat with it for a moment, put it aside. Then I stood up and walked into the entrance hall, wearing an expression of pleasant neutrality. Yilong saw me and visibly steeled himself. He had clearly been expecting another spat. "Yilong," I said warmly, as if greeting a good friend. "You're here. Have you eaten? Auntie Tong just made osmanthus cake. Let me bring some out." Yilong stared at me. Jing stared at me. I smiled at both of them and went to find Auntie Tong. From the kitchen, I counted to 10, then came back with a small plate of the osmanthus cakes, pale golden squares, fragrant, set it on the side table, told them to enjoy, promised there'd be no more fights, and relocated to the balcony to continue reading. I heard Jing come to stand in the doorway a minute later. I didn't look up. He stood there for another moment, then went back to Yilong. I heard the low murmur of their conversation and kept reading with contentment. The second instance was more satisfying. As usual, Jing and Yilong were sitting in the main room talking. When I appeared in the doorway with my jacket already on and my bag over my shoulder, "Jing Jing," I said. I had started using this nickname approximately 2 days in, deployed at calculated moments, and the way Jing's expression softened every single time never got old. "I'm going shopping. I'll be back by dinner." Jing's eyebrows went up slightly. The original Baoching would sooner have sat in the room radiating hostility than voluntarily left Jing alone with Yilong. "Do you want me to—" No, I waved the hand. "You two catch up, I'll take the car." I blew him a small kiss, nodded pleasantly at Yilong, and left. At the nearest mall, I bought clothes, plushies, accessories, perfumes, and whatever caught my eye. Joy filled me as I wondered which store to visit next. It was such a pleasure to buy things without having to check its price. I sniffed the air, fried chicken. Might as well fill my stomach, too. When I returned home, Jing was sitting in the entrance hall. Not the living room, the clear implication being that he had been waiting for little old me. I set my bags down. "Yilong left already?" I asked him to leave after 40 minutes. "I didn't want you to come home to—" Jing. I crossed to him, tilted my head slightly, and gave him the smile I had been perfecting. "I trust you." Jing reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the fond look on him nearly melting me. Success. My high-level coquettishness, I was rather enjoying. It was a useful skill to be properly applied. The original Baoching had used it like a blunt instrument, batting his eyes, clinging, making his wanting so visible it became uncomfortable. Amateur work. What I understood from extensive reading was that the truly effective version was subtle, suggestive without being explicit, leaving the other person to arrive at a conclusion themselves. One evening, Jing came home late from a meeting, clearly tired, jacket already half off as he came through the door. I was on the sofa, legs tucked under me, lamplight doing very flattering things to my face, which I had timed and positioned with the help of the internet. "Hungry?" "I ate," he said. "Tea, then." I uncurled from the sofa and went to the kitchen before he could answer, returning with a cup of chamomile tea. I set it in front of him on the table and sat back down, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching, and resumed my reading. He drank the tea. After a moment, he leaned back and the tension in his shoulders visibly dropped. "How was your day?" he asked. I told him about a mildly funny thing that had happened when I'd called to order takeout for lunch. Auntie Tong had the afternoon off, and I got put on hold for 15 minutes and then accidentally ordered 3 portions of spicy chicken wings instead of 1 because the call quality was terrible. So I ate all 3 portions. They were excellent wings. Jing laughed. He laughed more than the novel had suggested, And man, that deep laughter was rather attractive. In fact, he could win the sexy laugh competition if they ever held one. Then one evening, Jing initiated intimacy. We'd had a quiet dinner, Auntie Tong's sweet and sour mandarin fish paired with stir-fried pea shoots, and had moved to the sitting room, the lights low, some ship engineering program on the TV that neither of us was really watching. Jing had been looking at me for a while. I had great peripheral awareness, and since I'd been strategically deploying charm for several weeks, I'd become very attuned to being looked at. Then he reached over and tucked a strand of hair away from my face, letting his fingers trail slightly. I swallowed. I was not naive. I knew what was happening. I knew this day would come. Well, I suppose this was another benefit. So I turned toward him, closed the remaining distance, and we resolved the matter. Afterward, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, basking in the comfort of being hugged by a warm and slightly sweaty body. A life of good food, good sheets, and a male lead who was exceptional, both up there and down there. Now that I thought about it, I wasn't really opposed to the idea of falling for this guy. Initially, it was for the money, but now it was for the money and the owner of the money. Yup, I was staying. Chapter 4. I woke up the next morning feeling sore in very specific places, my back and lower down. Jing was already up. I could smell something coming from the direction of the kitchen and followed the smell, patting down the hallway in Jing's shirt, making sure my killer thighs were visible, and found him at the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled, making kanji. He looked over when I appeared in the doorway. I leaned against the doorframe, hair still wrecked, and said nothing. He looked back at the pot, but I didn't miss the way his gaze dropped to my thighs. I sat at the kitchen island and watched him cook. I was absolutely 100% acing this second life. The evidence was clearly there. Underfloor, heated marble beneath my feet. The smell of kanji with ginger and shredded chicken, thin wisps of steam curling up from the pot, an Adonis of a man making me breakfast after a night that I intended to repeat as many times as I wanted. In my previous life, I had been woken up by a 6 a.m. alarm to commute 45 minutes to a job that had terminated me without a care. I had eaten convenience store meals at my desk for lunch. My boyfriend had been kissing someone else in a restaurant for what I suspected, in retrospect, had been a considerable amount of time. Jing set a bowl in front of me, the kanji topped with a drizzle of chili oil. He sat across from me with his own bowl and opened his phone to read the morning news. At some point, I leaned over and fed him a few spoonfuls from my bowl. He accepted them without looking up from his phone. Domestic, quiet, comfortable. After that first night, I made several additional investments. Baoching's existing clothes were good. The original had understood that looking beautiful was a form of currency. But I went further. I already knew, from paying close attention, that Jing's gaze had particular reactions to particular things. The deep blue silk, anything fitted through the shoulders, shorter hems in the evenings. I purchased accordingly. I also, on a separate afternoon when Dueling came with me to a department store, found the lingerie section and made what I considered a sound investment in several pieces. Dueling, who was small and round-faced and had the most expressive eyebrows I had ever encountered, held up a particular piece of black lace and looked at me. "For a specific purpose?" she asked. I only grinned and put it in the basket. Dueling had been, in the novel, Baoching's sole genuine friend, the only person who had stayed beside him through the tantrums and the schemes, who had offered honest advice that Baoching had consistently ignored. Meeting her in person had been nice, actually. She was warm and nice and so cute. She had been extremely cautious with me the first 2 times we met. I'd seen her watching, waiting for the old Baoching to surface. By the third time, when I'd shown up to the cafe we'd agreed on with a glossy white bag she'd mentioned offhand the week before, she had teared up and become more open. After that, we were fine. I was generous with her. I was living off a black card, which made generosity easy. I bought her the earrings she had admired for 30 seconds before moving on. I booked lunch at the Cantonese restaurant with the 2-hour wait and the Peking duck that arrived at the table whole, lacquered and crackling. Dueling had eaten it with delight. "Baoching," she had said finally, setting down her chopsticks, "you are a different person, and I mean this as a compliment." I smiled and served her more duck. It was on one of our outings, maybe 4 weeks in, that we ended up at a famous cafe known for its crepes. Thin as paper, filled with whipped cream and fresh fruits like strawberries, berries, and bananas, the cream just barely sweet, the sliced fruits cold and bright. There was always a line, but we had arrived early. We had just been seated, menus in hand, when I heard the door open, and in walked Jing. And beside him, Yilong. They were at the door talking to the host. Yilong was doing the thing he did, the light laughter, the lean, that way of occupying Jing's space with ease. He had on an expensive-looking outfit, as always. After all, he, like Jing, came from old money. Dueling's hand had frozen over the menu. I watched her watching me. I looked back at the menu. The strawberry cream crepe, obviously. "Yes," Dueling said carefully. "The strawberry one." Jing had spotted me by then. I knew because I caught the movement in my peripheral vision. I looked over, gave him a small, natural smile and a nod, did the same for Yilong, and returned to my menu. They were seated 2 tables away. Dueling waited until the waiter had left with our order, then leaned forward with her elbows on the table. "You are not going to—" "I'm here for yummy crepe and a good time," I said. She stared at me. "Dueling." I poured us both water. "Relax. The crepes are coming." She sat back slowly. The crepes arrived, the strawberry cream arriving in a perfect pale roll, powdered sugar dusted over the top. By the time we finished, I had not glanced over at the other table at all, and Dueling had fully relaxed by the 3rd bite of her crepe. Outside on the pavement afterward, she linked her arm through mine. "Jing is a loyal guy. He's just being a friend to Yilong. You told me they were childhood friends, right?" Life was excellent. The days had a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were slow and domestic. I immensely enjoyed them. The unhurried quality of coffee and breakfast, and the sounds of the villa waking up. Afternoons were mine to fill as I liked, which I did with shopping, with dueling, with the luxurious habit of sitting on the terrace with a book and a plate of whatever tasty thing Auntie Tong had made that day, usually something that involved pastry or sesame or both. Evenings brought Jing home, and I had become genuinely pleased when I heard his car in the drive. Jing was staring at me more and more these days, long, appreciative looks that he didn't always bother to hide. I preened under his increasing attention. I was also becoming increasingly aware of Yilong. Specifically, I was becoming aware of Yilong's eyes. In one instance, I caught him at the villa on a weekend afternoon, Jing in the garden on a call and Yilong waiting in the living room. I came down the stairs, and for a split second before Yilong looked away, I saw it. A look that was not warm. Something colder. Assessing. In another instance, I was at a gallery opening that Jing had taken me to abstract sculptures and small glasses of expensive wine. I was standing with a glass of white wine talking to one of Jing's colleagues when I turned my head and caught Yilong's eyes from across the room directed at me with an intensity that he immediately dissolved into a smile the second our eyes met. I smiled back. There were a number of other instances that were getting hard to ignore. Turns out, the main character of this novel had a rotten personality and was bringing shame to the entire main character category. I had suspected it. The glances, the careful positioning, the artful helplessness deployed exclusively in Jing's vicinity. It came via a conversation Dueling had with her cousin, who moved in overlapping social circles. Yilong, it seemed, was not simply recovering from a breakup. Yilong had a plan, and the plan involved Jing, and Yilong had apparently been telling mutual acquaintances with great sadness and much sighing that he feared Jing's current relationship was not, here was the word he used, healthy for Jing. I had listened to my dear Dueling relay this information over hot pot. The broth was rich, fragrant, and I had dropped a slice of Wagyu into it and watched it curl at the edges. He said that? His exact words, apparently, Dueling confirmed. Had the novel ever mentioned Yilong saying such a thing? I didn't recall any of it. This meant the plot was changing. Not surprising, really, given that I had already switched up Baoching's personality considerably. This was like one of those butterfly effect things, or whatever. Chapter 5. In the novel, Jing had been written as the usual male lead. Strong, loyal, emotionally restrained, devoted once his heart was made up. He was a good male lead. I had thought so when I read it. He was fair, he kept his word, he did not play games. Living with him was confirming all of this and adding several details the novel hadn't covered. On a Saturday afternoon, I pulled out the board games I had found in the study cabinet and dropped them on the coffee table in front of Jing. "Teach me chess." I settled myself onto his lap. Jing went very still for exactly 1 second. Then he reached around me, moved the board into position, and began explaining the pieces. I was, by my own assessment, a reasonably quick learner, and by Jing's expression, a sufficiently entertaining opponent. We played 6 rounds, I lost all 6, and at some point, the board games gave way to a card game that Jing claimed he hadn't played since university, which he then proceeded to win every round. "You've definitely played this since university," I pointed at him. "I haven't." He had on the straightest face I had ever seen on a human being. I poked him in the side, and it turned out to be a big mistake. The next second, Jing's fingers found my ribs, and I went from composed to completely undone in seconds. I twisted, grabbed his wrists, failed entirely to stop him, and ended up laughing so hard I could barely breathe, face flushed, eyes watering, completely at the mercy of his unrelenting fingers. "Stop," I managed. "Jing, please." He only shook his head. By the time he finally relented, I was sprawled against him, flushed and breathless, and he was looking down at me with an expression that was warm and very, very pleased. Then he kissed me, and we had a good make-out session for the next half hour, which led to deeper exercises. One thing I especially enjoyed was that Jing had started touching me with less deliberateness and more habit. A hand at my back when we walked through a crowd, his thumb moving along mine when he held my hand. After dinner, we would move to the sofa, some film or other on the TV, and at some point, Jing would pull me closer. He would be watching the screen, his arm around me, his hand rubbing slow and absent circles along my arm, and I would look at the TV and feel unreasonably content. Then we'd usually kiss, which would inevitably lead to the kind of activities that explained why I always slept very well these days. One morning, Jing informed me over the excellent red bean and glutinous rice balls Auntie Tong had made, watching my face with a particular attention. "Yilong is coming by this evening, just briefly." I nodded and ate another rice ball. "Just briefly," he repeated. "Okay, Jing," I gave him the smile. The strategy since the gallery and the hot pot revelation had been patience, visible trust, and the private investigators I had arranged. This last item was just information management. I liked Jing, so it was a measure to safeguard my financial situation. Sensible information management was not paranoia, it was foresight. Their reports were consistent. Jing kept every meeting with Yilong short, never anywhere private, always with an evident awareness of time. Their meetings very rarely exceeded an hour. I had rewarded Jing's reported firmness with Yilong one evening by appearing in the doorway of his study in a black lingerie, the one Dueling had smirked at in the department store. I knew I looked like a dream. Jing had looked up from his laptop. I had said nothing, only winked. He had closed the laptop and hurried over to me. We had a long night. My voice the next morning had turned husky with overuse. Auntie Tong, who had the discretion of someone who had worked in this villa long enough to know precisely when not to make eye contact, had simply put a cup of honey lemon water on the counter beside my breakfast without comment. I had drunk it gratefully. That was one of many such nights, and I regretted none of them. Never in my previous life would I have believed that I would one day be carefully selecting dreamy lace outfits and putting them on for a male lead. And yet, here I was, and I had absolutely no complaints. Following month had a certain quality. My book sense was tingling. I could feel it. I could almost taste it. There was going to be a climax, not the same one with Jing and me, but the climax of a story. The culmination was coming. A few days later, Yilong arrived at the villa unannounced. What's new? Jing was upstairs. I was in the sitting room, reading on the sofa with packets of chips, biscuits, and dry cakes. I heard the door, heard Annie Tong's voice, then Yilong's, and put my phone down. He came into the sitting room. We exchanged pleasantries. Jing came down within a few minutes. I went back to reading while they talked, or appeared to read. About 20 minutes in, Jing's phone rang from upstairs. I heard the distinct ringtone he'd set for his business partner, and he excused himself to take it, the call being one he'd mentioned, waiting on all week. I didn't look up when Yilong watched me. I focused on my phone. The story was entering a juicy scene. Yilong shifted in his seat, looked toward the staircase, looked back at me. Then he stood. I watched from my periphery as he moved toward the stairs. Halfway up, he seemed to think better of it. He stopped, took a step back, then began descending, and then everything happened in seconds. The stumble, the grab at the banister that didn't quite catch, the descent of the last 3 steps in an audible tumble, and then Yilong sitting on the floor with a wail loud enough to reach Jing. As expected, Jing came out of the bedroom at the sound. Yilong looked up at him, tears already rolling down his cheeks. Baoching pushed me. I had been on the sofa, on the opposite side of the room, meters away from the staircase, for the entire preceding 20 minutes. I had not moved. I wanted to laugh. I bit my tongue hard. Then I stood up, turned to Jing, my expression downright pitiable, rivaling Yilong's. My voice, when it came, was tremulous. Jing, do you believe him? Jing, to his credit, took no time to answer. No, he said very firmly. I gave him a small, grateful look and quietly applauded him in my head. Because if he had hesitated even half a second, even with a blink, we would have been in separate bedrooms for the next 1,000 years. Yilong scrambled up from the floor and the performance shifted. His eyes were now red at the edges and he grabbed Jing's arm with both hands. Jing, please, you have to believe me, I wouldn't. Stop. Jing's voice was very quiet. Stop now if you know what's good for you. Yilong did not stop. The crying escalated, the grip on Jing's arm tightened. I watched with fascination because Yilong was not bad at this. The wobbling lip, the desperate eyes, the look of complete innocence, but he was an amateur compared to the absolute green tea I had become. A talented amateur, but still. Yilong drew a shaky breath and said, It's fine. I don't mind. I know I've been overstepping. I won't come here anymore. He sounded so noble, so self-sacrificing. I almost scoffed. Jing's jaw set. He reached for his phone and called the head guard. Shin, bring up the footage from the last 15 minutes, interior cameras. Yilong's face went through several colors. I waited one beat, then walked up to them and tugged gently at Jing's sleeve. Jing, did you mean the camera up there? I pointed upward toward the ceiling where the state-of-the-art light fixture housed, among other things, a camera with a very wide and uninterrupted view of the sitting room, the staircase, and approximately 6 meters in every direction. The ones the security company installed? Those ones? Jing confirmed. Yilong released Jing's arm. The cameras had been my own addition. I had spent approximately 2 evenings wheedling Jing about security, bringing it up softly while curled against him on the sofa, deploying an array of pouts I knew would not fail me. I just get nervous sometimes. I had said, being here when you're at work, the house is very large. He had looked at me for a long moment and then called the security company the next morning. Every corner of the villa installed within the week. My foresight was genuinely impressive. You don't need to do that, Yilong said, and his voice had lost most of its performance quality. I don't mind. I mean, it was an accident. I'm not going to make a fuss about it. Jing's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then turned it so the screen was visible. A minute of footage. Me on the sofa, reading, not moving. Yilong stumbling on the stairs entirely of his own arrangement. The camera had excellent resolution. Oh, the things money could buy. I let the moment sit for precisely as long as it needed to, then tugged at Jing's hand one more time and said softly, with my most gentle expression, It's okay. I don't mind. The same words. The deliberate echo of Yilong. Jing's hand turned in mine and held it. Then he looked at Yilong. I have been patient because of how long we have known each other. I think I have been too patient. He paused. I am ending this friendship. I think you understand why. Yilong opened his mouth. And, Jing continued in the same level voice, you have been meeting your ex-boyfriend. I have seen you both outside a hotel on at least 2 occasions. I blinked. I hadn't known this. This was new information. Wow. The tea was scalding hot, and Jing had just served it without even changing his expression. Surprise flickered across Yilong's face. Jing was not done yet. I don't know what you were hoping to find here, but I think you should direct that energy toward yourself. And I would advise you, with sincerity, not to come here again. Yilong's face crumpled. He turned and ran, a sob breaking out of him as he went through the door and it swung shut behind him. I looked at the door for a moment, then looked up at Jing. Jing, I said. He looked down at me, expression soft. I took his collar in both hands, drew him down, and rewarded him with a kiss. When we paused for a break, his hands were still cupping my face and our lips were swollen. He was looking at me with a dazed expression. "Best boyfriend," he drawled. I took his hand and turned toward the bedroom. Epilogue. 10 months ago, I had been a recently fired, recently cheated on salaryman with a month's savings. Now I was sitting on a terrace in the late afternoon sun, eating pork buns, having my feet massaged, and thinking that if Transmigration had a customer satisfaction survey, I would be leaving 5 stars. The pork buns were anti-tongs, thin, pillowy skin, the filling a perfectly seasoned mix of pork and ginger. I had eaten 3 and was contemplating a 4th. Jing was sitting at the end of the lounger, both my feet in his lap, working through a knot in my right heel with his thumb. We had been shopping all day. By the time we got home, my feet were sore, and I told Jing so in the particular whiny tone I had discovered months ago worked very efficiently on him. I had sat on the terrace and extended my feet toward him with an expression of suffering. He had sat down and picked them up without comment. Watching this gorgeous boyfriend of mine massage my feet, I decided I would tell him about Lao, about the truck, about the novel, and how I had arrived here. Not today, maybe next week, maybe in a year, maybe when we were old and gray. Dueling was coming for dinner on Saturday, and she was bringing Chow. Chow was a good friend of Jing's, steady, straightforward. Jing had made the introduction about 3 months ago. Dueling had come to me afterward and said, with her most controlled expression, "He's very nice." He remembered I mentioned I liked that bakery near town, and he brought chocolate croissant from there when he came to pick me up last week. They had been going out for 2 months now, and Dueling was glowing with happiness. As for Yilong, he was nowhere in sight since the day he ran out. 3 weeks after the door had closed behind him for the last time, a message had appeared on my phone from an unknown number. Baoching. I wanted to apologize. I behaved very badly. I think I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, but I was being selfish. I hope you and Jing are well. I wish you nothing but happiness. I'm sorry. I had stared at this message for a long time. Then I had shown it to Jing. He had looked at it without surprise and then shown me his own phone, where an identical message sat, also from Yilong, sent within seconds of mine. I shrugged. As long as he keeps his thoughts and hands away from my boyfriend. Jing chuckled. Then he had pulled me onto his lap and kissed me until I forgot entirely what we had been talking about. Then we kissed some more. Then we headed to the bedroom for heavy lifting. Jing applied some pressure to the knot in my heel. "Ow," I said, not very convincingly. He smiled and I ate a 4th bun. This, I thought, for the 100th time, the 1000th, and counting. This is the life.
The end. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next story. Bye.